Welcome, everyone, to the Nutrition and Breast Cancer Nutrition session for Building Strong Bones. I'm really glad to have you here today. And this session is recorded. So, for anybody watching after the fact, this will help to give you some information about nutrition and bone health. So I first want to acknowledge that, I as a settler am here on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. And this is really important for me to acknowledge that, the first peoples of this land, the first caretakers of this land really had great incredible knowledge about food and nutrition and well-being. And this is something that we really need to honor and learn more about. And of course, with the impacts of colonizations, there have been a lot of harms done, especially around food and health and well-being. And so it's really important for me to acknowledge this so that it's a reminder for me to keep learning and listening as I provide care and nutrition care to the folks living in Saskatchewan. Another kind of reminder and a refresher here is just that with nutrition advice, there's lots of variables, there's lots of complexities. So today, we are focused a little bit more on bone health, but even within that, there's still so much that we don't know and so much that we're learning. So just keep that in mind, take that with a grain of salt, as well as know that this is a general recommendations, a general session. So you might have more individual needs. And this certainly shouldn't replace any kind of one-on-one care that you need with your own dietitian or physician or caregiver of some sort. So just keep that in mind as we go through here, and certainly reach out with questions that you have. So as a just kind of general starting point or a foundation, we use this set of guidelines around nutrition here at the Cancer Center. We look at this kind of guidance around nutrition from the AICR, or American Institute for Cancer Research. So these cross over for a lot of different topics, but we'll kind of be touching on several of them today as we talk about bone health. If you're a keener and you really want to know more information about nutrition in general and cancer prevention and survivorship, please feel free to go to the AICR website and take a look at all of the incredible information they have there. So for today, we are focused mainly on, of course, breast cancer and bone health and how breast cancer fits into this equation. We're going to look carefully at vitamin D and calcium as kind of the main, nutrition topics, and you've probably heard of both of those things. But we'll also talk a little bit about other factors in nutrition as well as exercise that can impact your bone health. So to get you kind of started, I want you to just think what you feel kind of bone health is impacted with, and tell me, or just kind of think to yourself what you think the answer is, and we'll kind of get into why or why not any of these are factors. All right, so if you said D, all of the above, your family history of osteoporosis, whether you've been through cancer treatments, and as well as whether you've been through menopause, these all have implications in your bone health. They all affect how strong your bones can be. So a little bit more in detail around breast cancer and why this is important for bone health. A few factors. One being some of the treatments that we see in breast cancer patients do put your bones at risk for becoming weaker. We also see often menopause as a factor through, surgeries or treatments that might accelerate your process through menopause, and this too impacts your bone health overall. And so nutrition really plays a role in keeping those bones strong. So we'll start with our first topic around nutrition, and that is in vitamin D. So you've probably heard of this before. It's essential for strong bones. It really helps your calcium to be absorbed, and it can be a really difficult nutrient to get enough of for lots of reasons. Definitely in Canada, we're more at risk, and we'll talk a little bit more about why. But also your skin pigmentation. So those with darker skin, as well as those who are aging, may have more risk for being low in vitamin D. D. And then there are some medications as well that don't allow for your vitamin D to be absorbed as well. So there's lots of reasons why we might have a low vitamin D. So again, another kind of skill testing question here to get you thinking. Lots of folks will say, I get enough sun in the summertime, I'm probably good. I don't need any vitamin D supplements. Now, do you think this is true or false? And it is false. It is false. So living in Canada, especially, we just don't get enough vitamin D from the sun. Obviously, the sun is not out all the time, or we're not in our shorts and t-shirts all year round. But even with that in mind, we don't want to be relying on the sun for vitamin D, partly because of sun safety and the risk for skin cancer with sun exposure. Not to mention, of course, just living in Canada, we're just not in the right global area to get all of that absorption from the sun. So indeed, vitamin D is created in your skin once it's exposed to sunlight, but we just really prefer to practice good sun safety and get our vitamin D from other sources. So that looks like some of the foods up here on the slide. Some of these foods might be in your, everyday or weekly rotation, but to be honest, it can be really tough to eat enough of these foods in order to meet your vitamin D needs. So it's one of the very few nutrients that I kind of recommend to lots of folks to just take a vitamin D supplement in addition to eating these great vitamin D sources. So, dairy or fortified dairy products are really helpful to get some vitamin D in, as well as salmon. This is a really great source of vitamin D. And we will talk a little bit more about some other foods that kind of go together with vitamin D and calcium. But generally speaking, if you're a cancer survivor, breast cancer survivor, you should be taking at least 800 to 1,000 international units, or IU for short, every day. And your doctor might have told you to take more, and by all means, follow your doctor's advice if they've said to take more. So let's jump right into calcium because that's kind of our next big nutrient. And this is really essential for building your bones to be strong. So keeping that bone density high. So that means that the bones are less likely to be fragile or break and fracture. So getting enough calcium is really important for that. And it can be done through food and supplements. But it's really important not to go over the top with calcium. With things like calcium, a little bit is great, but more isn't necessarily better. So we really try to aim for getting enough. So if you're between 19 and 50, getting 1,000 milligrams a day, or if you're over 50, getting 1,200 milligrams per day. And that is combined with foods and supplements. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like exactly and how you can make that work for you. But before we do that, I want you to kind of get your wheels turning a little bit in the calcium direction. So, what do you think? What food on this list here is the lowest in calcium? Is it canned salmon, broccoli, Greek yogurt, or almonds? It is indeed broccoli. So all of these have some good calcium in them, but broccoli is the least amount. And we'll talk a little bit more about some other really great sources of calcium. So lots of folks think of milk or dairy products as a big calcium source, but it doesn't only have to be that. It can be things like beans, canned salmon with the bones, almonds, as well as tofu or fortified dairy products. Now, lots of folks will ask about what about the safety of dairy? I've heard about dairy and cancer or the hormones or antibiotics in milk, and that can be a really big concern. So I always like to take this time to just pause and maybe dispel a few myths that you might have around these dairy sources if it's something that you like to include. So in Canada, there are not hormones in the dairy cattle. And if a dairy cow needs antibiotics, they take that milk out of the system until the antibiotics have cleared. So that is something that isn't a factor in terms of dairy in Canada. If you're using, outside of Canada, if you're having US or European products or anything like that, they have a little bit different rules. So in the US, they are able to have the hormones in milk production, but through other research, that has not been shown to pose a risk to humans. It's not a risk to cancer survivors. So, um, I always say it's a personal choice, and at the end of the day, you make the choice that you're most comfortable with. But know that these are kind of the crucial information pieces to help you make an informed choice. So just to kind of recap with the calcium, when you think of that, 1,000 milligrams per day or 1,200 if you're over 50, looking at ways to kind of add up through the day all of those good calcium sources. And it can be from a variety of foods, and lots of these foods have, a really good availability of protein as well as calcium, which is important. We'll talk about that later. But you can kind of use these to help tally up to get as close to that goal in the day that you can. And then if you need to, you can supplement with calcium supplements as well. Now, I'll talk a bit about supplements, but I want to just ask, kind of take the temperature here around soy, because of course soy can be a calcium source, but I hear lots of discussion around soy and breast cancer. So what do you think? Are soy foods healthy for breast cancer survivors? True or false? And of course, that's true. So soy is safe to consume. Again, I know I hear lots about soy safety, and especially with breast cancer, and it indeed is safe to have, and it's a great source of protein and calcium. So for cancer survivors in the past, there has been a lot of discussion around it being a perhaps a phytoestrogen. You might have heard that term before, or estrogen-like compounds. And that is, in fact, old information, old data, actually done mostly on mice. And so the way that the science plays out is that we of course are not mice, and we metabolize products or food products more efficiently, and the soy is just not broken down into any harmful products for us. So it is safe to have, even if you've had a hormone related breast cancer. These are going to be good sources of protein and calcium if you choose to have them in your diet. So the last kind of piece around calcium I just wanted to point out is this calcium calculator. So if you're a numbers person and you really want to kind of see what you've been having for calcium, this is a great website to visit, and you can enter in the foods that you eat through the day, and it will tally up how much you're having for calcium. And then it will also tell you, how much are you lacking if you aren't meeting that goal, that 1,000 milligrams or 1,200 if you're over 50. And then it will give you kind of a rough estimate about how much calcium you need to meet your goal. So that can be a really helpful tool. Okay. On the supplement side with calcium, I know this is one that the doctors will often recommend, that you take a calcium supplement, but it can be tricky to find out what type or how much to take. A few things to remember when you're choosing a calcium supplement: of course, only take one if you need to. So if you've got lots of calcium sources in your diet and you're meeting that goal every day, most days, you don't need to take a calcium supplement. However, lots of us don't necessarily meet that goal, and it's okay to take some calcium to help top you up, but don't take more than 500 milligrams at a time. Your body just won't absorb it, and so it will be kind of a waste to your system that way. Just take less than 500 per dose, 500 milligrams, and we don't want to take more than those daily requirements. So that 2,500 or 2,000 milligrams if you're over 50. We just don't want to go over the top, right? A little bit is good, but more doesn't necessarily mean better. In terms of calcium carbonate or calcium citrate, both are great options. However, if you have a hard time with timing your medications with food, then I would suggest calcium citrate. You don't necessarily need food to help absorb that calcium. Calcium carbonate should be with food, and so take it with a meal or a snack, whatever works best for you. All right. So there's a few other factors I had mentioned, that do have to do with nutrition. Part of those are things like caffeine and alcohol, as well as sugar sweetened beverages. So these are all kind of our beverage category that definitely can impact how well your body absorbs the calcium, as well as just your overall bone health and strength. So if you're a big coffee drinker and you like to have many, many cups in the day, it might be a good idea to switch to decaf or cut back a little bit to about 3 8-ounce cups of coffee in the day. Or, if you have caffeine from other sources, that's something to think about as well. And alcohol can be a factor in how well you can absorb your calcium and your overall bone health. So, really limiting alcohol for that reason, as well as just overall cancer survivorship. Alcohol has been shown to be a risk factor for breast cancer recurrence. So, we want to try to limit or avoid alcohol as best as possible, whatever's within your means. Sugar sweetened beverages would be anything from pop to fruit punch to iced tea, frappuccinos, any of those kinds of drinks that might have sugar added. Those can certainly impact how well you can absorb your calcium, but it also can replace some of those healthy, nutritious drinks that we might be getting, like a glass of milk or a glass of soy beverage that can add some calcium and protein. So we don't want them to replace those products for us. Protein as the other one, a really big factor in helping your bones to stay strong, as well as, of course, your muscles. I think protein sometimes gets overlooked in terms of bone health because we're so focused on our muscles, but making sure that you have a source of protein with every meal is really, really helpful to go along with those calcium and vitamin D sources. So, like I said, lots of those calcium sources that we talked about are also sources of protein, which is really helpful. So, things like that canned salmon is going to be a protein as well. Obviously, dairy products as a calcium source, going to have some protein. Same thing with things like tofu or almonds. These are all great kind of double whammies. You get protein and calcium combined. So this is just an example of a day of kind of eating well for your bone health and just making some just tweaks and changes to help you to get a little bit more calcium in. So some of this might relate to what you already are eating. Some of this might be new or different information, but these are just some ways to see it in an example in an everyday format. So, if you're having toast, it might be helpful to put some almond butter on your toast to get some more calcium in there. You might also want to include some Greek yogurt for a little extra protein as well as some calcium. If you're having a sandwich, if you really like deli meat, we generally say to avoid or limit deli products or deli meats, I should say, and you could replace that with some canned salmon, with the bones in there. So you're getting kind of again a double win there. You're reducing some risk factors for that with the deli meats or the processed meats, but you're also adding some really nutritious, beneficial options with the canned salmon. And then you can also have kind of a combo meal with that stir fry. If you have chicken, so you're having a meat in your meal, but you also might add tofu for a little extra calcium source. And it also can kind of help you balance between a meat and a plant food because we're always trying to get more plant foods in our diet for cancer survivorship. And lastly, kind of swapping out a sugary beverages like cola to perhaps a fortified soy beverage just to get a little bit more calcium into your day. Now, as a bonus in your day, trying to add in some exercise. We'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like, but adding in any little bit that you can, even if it's taking the stairs instead of the elevator or, walking from your parking spot a little bit farther away. If you're out playing with your kids or your grandkids, going, climbing a hill or trying to get some daily exercise in, especially something that has some resistance training to it as well. And we'll talk a little bit more here about that. So for bone health, this is really important for exercising daily or trying to get in about 30 minutes 5 times a week if you can. You can start slow though. You can just start with 5 or 10 minutes, and of course do what's safe and recommended for you, depending on where you're at in your treatment and in your health journey. If you're able to, getting some aerobic exercise as well as those weight bearing or resistance exercises as well. So getting your heart working, but also your muscles, and then working on balance as well. These are all really important for keeping you strong, keeping your bones strong, but also being able to prevent falls, which of course, if our bones are not strong and we fall, we are at more risk for breaking a bone or fracturing. So, of course, I'm the dietitian. I don't talk about exercise a ton, but I do always have to put a little plug in for this exercise. Certainly seek out some more advice from a physiotherapist or an exercise specialist to help you to do this safely. All right. So to kind of wrap up, what we covered today, we went through kind of why bone health is important specifically for breast cancer survivors. We also talked about how calcium, vitamin D, protein, all of these things combine to help you to build really strong bones through your nutrition. And on the flip side, looking at some things to maybe avoid or cut back on that might be making it harder for your bones to stay healthy. So things like caffeine, excessive caffeine, sugary beverages, as well as alcohol being things to pull back on. And then making sure we're adding in some of that exercise to keep those bones nice and healthy. So I'll ask you, what is one thing out of our discussion today that really stuck with you or something that you're going to take with you into your week? You can put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and let me know.
Hi there. It's Courtney. I'm just going to say that remembering about the calcium supplements and that carbonate should be taken with a meal and citrate doesn't have to be.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad that that stuck with you. That's awesome. Anyone else? All right. Well, if you think of one, feel free to chime in. But wrapping up here today, I remind everyone to, if you're wanting to make some nutrition changes, to really do so with a goal in mind, but also breaking it down into really small, manageable steps. Nutrition, I find, is really, really tough to make big, huge changes that will last. So breaking things down into really tiny, tiny steps will help you to put things into practice and keep them going for a longer time. Now I'll open it up to any questions that you might have. So feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat and I'll read it for the group. I'm not hearing any questions, so maybe I'll give you a few more seconds to kind of think of some questions that maybe have come to mind. Otherwise, we will wrap it up for today. Okay. Well, I get another question here. Thank you for the info, says Jen. Thank you. Could you do another quick review for me, a vegetarian that does not eat dairy? Absolutely. So, yeah, if you're a vegetarian, you're not much for dairy, but you want to try to get calcium sources, and this is a great question, Jennifer. So, our sources that maybe don't include meat or dairy would be calcium sources, would be things like almonds, tofu, especially tofu that has been fortified with calcium. So check the label for calcium to be on the label, as well as beans, so navy beans or chickpeas as well. And then it's a type of kind of a tofu or soy product, but it would be tempeh, or things like edamame or soy beverage if you're open to drinking that as well. Great question, Jennifer. Any other questions? Oh, Courtney, great questions about plant milks. What about plant milk? So what we often think of when we hear plant milks, we think of rice milk, coconut, almond milk, those sort of alternative milks. So they go by many names, but basically things that aren't a cow's milk. And this can be a tricky area because it has very kind of a wide variety of protein. So that would be kind of my first check. If you're looking at a plant-based milk, is to look for how much protein it has. Milk or milk alternatives can be a really great source of protein, but some are, not created equal, I guess we'll say. So soy-based beverage, as one of the plant milks, is going to naturally have protein in there, whereas something like almond milk or rice milk, coconut milk, they are not naturally high in protein. So that is one area that would be a concern for me because you're not getting the protein you normally would be. The other thing to look for is fortification, which means that they've added the calcium back into the plant-based milk, similar to what would already be in a cow's milk. So again, you can kind of take a quick peek at the label and see it will sometimes say fortified right on the front, but a great check is just to look at the nutrition facts table to see that calcium has been, that there is some calcium in there. What we're looking for is around 300 milligrams per serving, so per 1 cup serving. That's similar to cow's milk. And if you forget that number, my trick is to just take the cow's milk container and the plant-based milk container and compare the two to see if their calcium is similar. So I hope that answers your question about plant milks, Courtney. Okay, another question. Is there any difference in absorption from cow's milk versus plant-based beverage for calcium? Yeah, that's a really good question. Certainly with the protein combined with the calcium, we know that there's a kind of a synergistic effect for bone health with any of the cow's milk versus plant-based milks. But typically, you should be able to absorb as much calcium from either one as long as you're having, the fortified plant-based beverage. Good question. Anybody else? Jennifer asked, can I take calcium and vitamin D at the same time? Absolutely. Yes, you certainly can take calcium and vitamin D, or you can spread them out. Yeah, you just mentioned, can I take them together or spread them out? And either is fine. We like to have calcium and vitamin D go together because they, vitamin D helps calcium to be absorbed better. But, I know it can be tricky to time out your medications and your pills, especially if you have other things to take. And so if it's easier to take your calcium, say with a meal and your vitamin D, with breakfast or something at another time, that's okay too. What other questions might anybody have? Courtney is asking about magnesium. What about magnesium? This is I feel like a hot topic right now. I hear lots about magnesium, and it is really important for bone health for sure. We are generally getting enough in our diets if you're eating a well-balanced diet, and some of those good protein sources are also magnesium sources. So things like nuts and meats, as well as some leafy greens. So you typically don't need to take a magnesium supplement. However, if you've talked to your doctor and your pharmacist and that is something you want to go ahead with, that it would be okay to take. I always just caution people with magnesium supplements that they can affect your bowels. So if you're taking a magnesium supplement and you find you're having looser stools, that might be one of the culprits. So just use caution with that supplementation if you're using it. Right. I'll give it a few more minutes for any other questions, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so the question is it possible for me to rebuild bones as I get older? That is a really tough one to navigate for sure. So sometimes as we get older, we'll be told, through a bone density test that our bones have become weak, or we have osteoporosis, which means your bones have become weak. And it is very difficult to rebuild our bones back up to, what they were, say, when we were 20. But what we can do is to prevent future losses for sure. And we might be able to kind of keep our bone health as stable as we can. So, it's a tricky answer whether you can rebuild your bones, but we certainly can keep your bones as healthy as possible by using things like calcium, vitamin D, protein. And if you have been diagnosed with osteoporosis, to certainly follow the advice of your doctor to use your medications that can help build your bones and keep them strong. These are all excellent questions. Okay, I haven't heard any more. So I think I will wrap it up. But of course, if you watching this recording have questions, certainly reach out to your cancer center dietitian, whether you're at Saskatoon Cancer Center or Alan Blair Cancer Center. You will have access to dietitians, and certainly ask for a referral to chat with when one-on-one, and we'll be happy to answer even more of your nutrition questions. And that brings me to the end of the presentation, and I really appreciate your attention. Thank you and take care.